Okay, it's 4:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started, and some more folks may hop on and join us. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Bush, and I'm the Curator of History and Exhibitions Manager at the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia. And we're so excited today to do our first virtual artist talk with photographer Lauren Henkin. Thanks for joining us, Lauren.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Yes, you as well. Lauren's coming to us all the way from Maine, and we're going to talk more about her work here for a few minutes. This artist talk today is in conjunction with the museum's current exhibition documenting the rural South, which is an exhibition of photography I curated that spotlights 3 different photographers and their perspectives on the rural South over the past several decades. The show opened January 18th, I believe, so some of you with us may have had a chance to come see the show in person. If you haven't, don't worry, we're going to be showing you some images from the show during our talk today, some different examples of Lauren's work. And then hopefully at some point in the future when we're able to open our doors, some of you might be able to come see it again, or come see it for the first time if you haven't. I just want to let you know a little bit about how this is going to work today logistically. Lauren and I have a set of questions that we're going to talk through, and then for the last 10 or 15 minutes, we want to open it up to Q&A from you, the audience. So to be able to do that, if you are with us on with video or on a digital device, if you will look at the bottom of your screen among your menu options, you should see something called Q&A. And that might not be enabled right now, but it will be enabled towards the end of the session. And then you can just type your questions in there, and Lauren and I will be able to see them. Perfect, Janie. Janie's already tried it out. You can try that out. If you have a problem with that, there's also a chat functionality that should work quite well. I know we have at least one person joining us on the phone. So if you have a question and you're on the phone with us, what you can do is you can dial *9, and that will let our host know that you have a question you would like to ask, and they'll be able to unmute your audio and connect with you that way to ask that question. But again, we're going to save those questions for the last 10 or 15 minutes of our discussion. So around 4:45, 4:50, we'll plan to wrap up around 5 o'clock today, Eastern time. Okay, so with that out of the way, I will let you give you a little bit of background on Lauren herself. Born in Washington, D.C., artist Lauren Henkin graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from Washington University in St. Louis and now resides in Maine. Her work for the last 2 decades has focused on how we occupy and relate to space, the built and constructed form, and our surrounding landscape. Her work resides in over 20 institutional collections, including the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, the Portland Art Museum, the High Museum of Art, and more. Yale University has the largest collection of her work at more than 160 pieces. Some publications that have featured her work include Architectural Digest, New York Magazine, Oxford American, Landscape Stories, the Georgia Review, and the Maine Review. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Lauren, thanks again for chatting with us today. And we're going to start out. I'd like to ask, what sparked your initial interest in photography, and how did it intersect with your formal education in architecture?
Well, I actually started photographing while working on architecture projects in school. And I was using photography at the time to document different sites for different projects that I was working on. And I sort of realized early on that there would be a high chance that in the buildings that I would end up designing and building, that most people wouldn't be able to actually see or experience the buildings in person. And so photography to me became very important as a way for people to be able to experience what I was doing, as well as to be able to kind of plan for the more important perspectival views that I was designing for with the buildings. So it kind of started out as kind of a documentary tool to help with architectural design. But then it sort of became more and more important in terms of kind of framing particular views that I wanted people to be able to experience, either in the buildings or through the photographs. And then as things went on, it just became more and more important to me. I was lucky enough to be able to connect with an architectural photographer in school who kind of took me under his wing. We did kind of like an off the books kind of class. And we had a small darkroom in the school. And so I would just go in there and work in the darkroom, and he would generously kind of critique my work and start to kind of help guide my ability to see 3 dimensions in 2 dimensions. And so that's how it kind of started. And then I left school and started practicing architecture and realized that I really wanted to be more in creating of artwork than creating functional space. And so I just started kind of full steam going into photographic work. And my first full body of work was in Charleston, West Virginia. So that's kind of how it started.
Okay. And how far have your travels taken you as you've photographed? This is off script, but what's one of the more interesting places you've gone?
I think Nova Scotia. I did a project there called Displaced. At the time, my marriage was ending, and I just decided to go somewhere that I had never been as a way to kind of figure things out. And the camera became a tool for that healing process, I think, and kind of regaining a sense of self and a sense of purpose and a sense of ability. And so I went to Nova Scotia and photographed there for about a month by myself, went to some really remote areas. And so that place always kind of has a special position in my heart, just because of its remoteness and the beauty of that landscape. But I've done projects kind of all over the place. So I lived in Portland, Oregon for 4 years, and I made a lot of photographs on the West Coast, up from Seattle down through California, and of course in Portland. I did a small project in Texas, West Virginia, Alabama, New York City, Maine. So place plays an important role in the photographs that I've made.
Absolutely. And you're certainly well traveled on the continent. So the works that we have on loan in our exhibition right now are from the Do Good Fund, which is a Columbus-based nonprofit which is dedicated to collecting Southern photography after World War II and sharing that collection with all different types of communities, whether it's in traditional museum and gallery spaces or in more non-traditional settings as well. And I know we have a couple folks from Do Good with us today. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Alan. Hi, Jessica. So Lauren, could you tell us how you got connected with the Do Good Fund for this project?
Yeah, so Alan contacted me, gosh, maybe was it 2014? I was living in New York at the time, working on a project in Central Park. And he contacted me because he was interested in acquiring some photographs for the collection that I had made in West Virginia. And we just started talking. I really am a big admirer of Alan and Do Good and everything that he's done with that organization. And so I was just really curious about where he saw it going, what the next step was. And he had just mentioned that, they were thinking about maybe an artist in residency program. And I said, oh, well, how do I sign up for that? Let's talk about that. I'm really interested in that. And I ended up making a formal proposal to him. And he thought that Greensboro, Alabama, Hale County would be a great place to have the first residency because of the history of photography there with Christenberry and Walker Evans, and it being kind of just sort of a mecca for photographers. And I got very excited by that. And that's how our conversation began. But if you don't, I just want to say, if you don't know Do Good, please look them up, go to their website. They have a great website with lots of photographs of the American South. And I'm very grateful to Alan and Do Good, not just for giving me this opportunity to come to the South and photograph, but because they collect a lot of up and coming photographers who may not have galleries, which is so important. And they show photographs in areas that don't necessarily have access to seeing art. So it's really a unique organization, and one that I am really proud to have to be affiliated with.
Absolutely. They're really great partners with us at the museum as well. Definitely a boon to our area. So we talked a little bit about different places that you've shot before. So as an artist, what drew you to an artist in residency opportunity in the South in particular? And then as a follow-up, had you done a similar residency before? And if so, how did this experience differ?
I'm trying to think of like the chronology. This was the first residency of this type that I had done. I had done, I think, one other residency in Portland, but at the time I was living there, and this was completely different. Alan and I had kind of predetermined the place, but what was really nice was that he didn't put any restrictions on me in terms of what his expectations would be for my coming out of the residency. And so that really gave me the opportunity to, in some ways, try and kind of plan what I would do, but also to just go there with a completely open mind. So to your question, the place was kind of predetermined. I didn't necessarily go into my conversation with him thinking like, oh, I'm very interested in the South, but what I would say is that I'm very interested in different places. And so I hadn't done any work in the South really, and I was very interested in seeing the landscape and seeing the people and seeing what I could do there that that would further my abilities and to further the conversation about what photography is in the South today.
Have you returned to the South for a project since then?
I've been back a couple of times, but not to make photographs.
Okay. So we're going to start to talk about the project a little bit itself. So you mentioned that the project was centered around Greensboro, Alabama, or Hale County, Alabama, which is in the Black Belt. And it's received an outsized share of attention from American photographers. You mentioned earlier that Walker Evans and William Christenberry famously shot there. More recently, Ramel Ross completed a photography project and a documentary in Hale County. How did this influence your approach to the project, if it did at all? What did it mean to you to join this male-dominated canon of the chroniclers of Hale County?
Well, I already knew the photographs going into the residency. And I think that when you're kind of going into an experience like that, when you know that some of the great photographs have been made in the very locations that you're going to, that can be a little intimidating. But luckily for me, I had just completed my project in Central Park called The Park, which you can see on my website. But there were great photographers documenting Central Park, from Davidson to Lee Friedlander. And so I had gone into that project, I think, feeling the weight of that history even more than going to Alabama. And so I kind of didn't really feel it so much. What was really kind of fun was to find the photographs. Like I would, drive around, and it's not a huge area, and you would just come upon, a Christenberry that looks maybe a little different now than it did in the photograph, but it was like, it almost sort of felt like I felt his presence kind of like encouraging me a little bit. And so it was, I felt like encouraged by the history of it. But I could really see how some people might get hung up on that or be intimidated by that. But for me, it was sort of a positive, to and an honor to be able to kind of go there and continue this great tradition of photography.
Absolutely. And then as a follow-up, I wanted to ask, as an outsider and a woman, did you ever feel that you were restricted in your travels and your photographic subjects, either because of local customs, local expectations, or ever any safety thoughts, anything like that? Or did you feel like you could move about pretty freely?
Um, I felt there's definitely some cultural divides. But one thing is I had someone with me, I had an assistant with me the whole month, which was a gift. I'd never had that before. And so for the most part, I felt I didn't really feel restricted, especially because Zach, who was with me, is much more outgoing than I am. And so he, I think he could sense at times the introvert in me taking over, and he would just, kind of pull me back out of that when I needed to engage a lot of people, or but there was one instance where I felt unsafe, and that was we had ventured into this kind of this area, I can't even describe it, that was clearly not an area that we were supposed to be in. We were clearly trespassing, and someone saw us, and we were driving out of the area and basically chased us down the road and kind of like basically forced me off the off the road. But it was fine. But that was really the only time I actually felt very safe. I felt very welcomed, especially I think the third and fourth weeks that I was there, because people started to recognize me. There were a couple of churches that we went to repeatedly. So, it just became, I sort of became more accepted. I think that the challenge for the project was only being there for a month. you know, to really kind of forge those relationships and to make connections where people really start to feel very comfortable with you is hard in such a compressed period of time. But for the most part, you know, people really welcomed me, talked with me about what I was doing, tried to participate, and I felt very, very comfortable there. It was really a beautiful time to be there. It was very, I had been told that it had been a very rainy spring. And so everything felt very lush. You can see the greenery in this photograph. And I was kind of overwhelmed by the beauty of the place, actually, and the spiritual kind of quality to it, both in terms of, you know, the personalities of the people, but also in their relationship to animals and in their you know, uh, commitment to church and faith. And so it was really a wonderful experience for me.
And just as to refresh my memory, what month were you there, or
It
when
was
were you there?
it was May of 2015.
Okay, so just
Yeah.
before the very hot season.
Yes, exactly. And it was really interesting, actually, because the first 2 weeks of the residency were drastically different weather-wise from the last 2 weeks. So I don't know if there's just some shift that happens in the middle of May, but so that was interesting to try and work with that also photographically.
I'm going to jump to a question that you teed up really well by mentioning the how you observed folks' spirituality and the importance of church, and as you were able to return to some of these churches over your month and build deeper connections with folks. And you've done a couple really wonderful interviews on this about this project. One with Lynn Scratch, which is a photography blog, and one with, I believe, an NPR station in Alabama. So I'd encourage folks listening to seek those out, Google those. They're really wonderful interviews. But when I was curating this project and reading what you'd previously spoken about, I was struck by how eloquently you talked about that role that spirituality and church services came to play during your time there, which really, it seems, came as a surprise to you. And most obviously, if folks are looking at your work on Do Good's website or looking at them in our exhibition, you'll see that the titles of the photographs all come from biblical phrases. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that aspect of the work, about both your experience and then also when you sat down and started naming those works, if that's something that you had in mind from the start, or if it kind of revealed itself to you as you were working with them afterwards.
So first of all, I'm Jewish, so I haven't spent a lot of time in church. um, so so what that means actually is that, you know, the language is foreign to me. And so there was one church that we went to where um, someone was getting up and saying, you know, the life of the flesh is in the blood, the life of the flesh is in the blood. And he was so like passionately repeating that and repeating that. And that, you know, it just started to kind of embed itself in me. And, you know, the presence of the color red there is, you know, in the earth, in the clay, and just around. I mean, it just became very prominent. It's like you put on a pair of glasses and that's all you end up seeing. And so when we would go to these churches, the language to me just sounded very poetic. And, you know, it was clearly a way for people to connect in the community. You know, you walk down Main Street in Greensboro and, you know, 6 of the primary buildings are churches. And so but you know, I would kind of see this spirituality played out in other ways too, just in terms of people's relationships to their animals seems very important. How people treat one another. There's just kind of like a beauty and a grace to the place that felt very unique to me. While also kind of being very dramatic. I mean, there's also like a sense that at any moment something could catch fire. I mean, we were driving down like one of the roads and there was like a car, you know, that had just looked like it had burnt out, and there's no one there. There's no explanation for it. And so there's this kind of like ambiguity and mysteriousness to the place that seemed to be, for me anyway, supported in some way by this kind of abstract poetry that I was experiencing in the church, and all of that is referenced by my own experience. I'm sure for someone else it's totally different, and so I didn't go into it thinking that the titles of the photographs would be phrases, but the more I thought about it, things just kind of connected that way. And I was reading more passages and kind of seeing these sort of what very poetic kind of references that seemed to somehow align with the photographs. And so it just seemed like the natural thing to do, which is also odd for me in a way, because most of the time I don't title my photographs. This is one of the few times that I did. But it just seemed appropriate. There's one photograph of a man named Jerry standing in front of his red Chevy car.
Yes. I think we had it up on the screen earlier for folks watching.
Yeah. And I'll just tell you, I mean, I'll tell you about him too. This gentleman runs the Humane Society in Greensboro, and you know, there was just something incredible about seeing this man and with his hands, you know, kind of gently holding this kitten, and there's just something in his eyes that is soulful and spiritual to me, and you can just sense kind of the gentleness and the care with which he provides for these animals there. Sorry, I diverted there because I saw the picture, but Jerry is someone that I met at a cafe there, and I would see him we would go into the cafe maybe every 3 days or something, just to talk and eat and kind of be immersed in the community. And he was there a lot too. And, you know, every Sunday I would see him outside the cafe kind of guiding cars in and out of the parking slot spaces outside the cafe, just to make sure that, you know, everybody got in and out safely. And he was just incredibly kind human being. And finally, you know, towards the end of the residency, I went and wanted to photograph him at his home, and he showed me his car, and I was like, well, what happened to, you know, those waves on the lights there? And he said the car had caught fire, and there was just no real explanation beyond that. Just, you know, kind of like what I was talking about before, there's sort of this ambiguous mystery to things there that I haven't experienced other places. And he just kind of left it at that. The car had caught fire, and it had melted the lights and the plastic. And so I can't remember exactly the title to this photograph, but it's something about fire and the wind gently blowing, and it just so perfectly kind of in an abstract way, but also in a literal way, kind of summed up this experience with him, this moment with him. Yeah, I have never experienced in any other place that kind of sort of spiritual caring and and you would just see it in other ways too. There's one photograph that I have in the series. I don't think it's in the show, but it's just like a little mural on a painted wall in downtown Greensboro, and it's a bird kind of being released from a cage and just kind of flying upward. And you know, so many times with photography, you're immersed in this project that you're trying to go somewhere with it, and you have this particular pair of glasses on for things that you're looking for to support this project that you're working on. And so I just became like hypersensitive to these kinds of images that I think the one you had one in there of the curtains, these very just sort of intimate moments of spiritual engagement that, to be honest, for me is not something that I have experienced very often. And so, yeah, I mean, that was inside the house where I was staying, and I had just been looking at these curtains and the light coming in for weeks. And then, you know, you reach a point where the prescription fits properly on your eyes for your eyesight, and you just see like, God, I've been looking at this thing for weeks, and now I see just how incredibly beautiful it is. And so I've gone off on a speech with your question, but it was an experience really that will stay with me, I think, forever. It's just really a powerful kind of not awakening, but a powerful realization of the power of sight.
I think I'm always struck by, just at a very basic level when I travel, how very familiar things look very different all of a sudden. So
Exactly.
thank you for sharing that. It was a really lovely meditation on that. I did want to ask you, and I've asked Bridget to pull this up. If do you want to share screen to the photo we were talking about earlier, Bridget? This might be my favorite work of yours in the show. It's hard to pick a favorite. It's either this one or the Dirt Road one, I think.
Yep.
But part of why I really liked this one was the story behind it. I didn't know if you might be willing to share about that.
Sure. Yeah. This is a woman who I observed a few times. This was in a church, probably about 20 minutes outside of Greensboro. And I had gone there a few times, and this woman never spoke. When I first saw her, I thought she was incredibly beautiful. She's tall, and there's a sense of kind of wisdom and stature to her. And I think that the fact that she never spoke to me kind of added to that. There was a sense of mystery to her. And so finally, on the last day that I was there, I decided, okay, this was the time to take some photographs. And she was wearing this like beautiful, striking green suit for the service. And just, there are times when kind of everything kind of comes together, and it's totally unpredictable. So I asked her if I could photograph her, and she just nodded. She said yes. And I think I was able to get one or two shots of her before she kind of walked away. And it's one of, it's one of the photographs that I'm most proud of making, because I have such a strong sense of respect and admiration for this person, but also because I'm not a portrait photographer really. And yet, you know, I'm incredibly proud of this portrait. I think one of the things that's hard to see on the monitor, but which people can experience in the show itself, is when you go up and you see the details of this suit and how well it's been cared for. And, you know, the pearls around her neck and the beautiful, you know, fabric of her hat, and the gray and the white in her hair, and the wrinkles in her face. And she even has, like, you know, these white whiskers on her chin, and in the photograph she's, you know, she's pointing to you with them. And to me it was just such a moment of like being proud of oneself, being proud of one's age, being proud of what one has achieved in life without at all having to communicate that in words. And so it was a moment for me as a photographer and a person that that I felt extremely proud to be a part of. So, you know, it's a striking image, and she's a striking woman. So I'm so glad that I was. It started to thunderstorm and pour about 10 minutes after this was made. So I'm so thankful that I was able to capture this photograph of her.
I think if it was possible, I like that picture even more now. Thanks for that. I wanted to move to a little bit of the technical aspects of the project. I know we have a couple of pictures of you that will come up here in a minute, I think, working with your camera, but I know that you selected it for a very specific reason. So maybe if you could just talk about your approach to that from the technical side.
Yeah. So I work with 3 cameras. I work with a 4x5 field camera, and which is like, if you imagine like the Ansel Adams camera. For those of you who aren't familiar with photography, it's half that size. So Ansel Adams was taking negatives that were 8x10, so I'm using a 4x5, which is half that size. So you can imagine the negative size is about that big. And that camera is my favorite camera, and the reason is because it's a very slow process, which can be frustrating at times, especially as weather conditions change. But that camera, I don't know how to describe it. It sees the way I see. So when I make a photograph with that camera, it captures what I'm looking for in the photograph in a way that any other camera that I've used has a harder time with. And so I like using it. I like the process of it. I like seeing an image upside down in the ground glass. I like not being able to see the final shot until I get the film back. But the other 2 cameras that I use are both medium format cameras. They're Mamiyas. One is a 6x6 square format, which is about this size negative, so smaller negative, and the other is a 6:7 format, which is what that last photograph was made using. And those cameras are really much better if you have to move more quickly. They're sized, you know, almost like an extra large. God, I'm thinking like the 35 millimeter camera. That probably sounds so old at this point, but those are cameras that I can easily walk around with and move very quickly with. But the 4x5 really just, I'm so relaxed when I'm using it because I know I'm going to get what I want.
I'm looking here, trying to see.
Oh yeah, there's one. So this photograph was made by Zach Kramer, who was assisting me. And this is me using the 4x5. And so you can see that I have the dark cloth over my head so I can actually compose the image. And it's, you know, it's kind of a cumbersome piece of equipment. It's heavy. It draws attention, which can be a positive or a negative. I've had people, there was one time where we just set up the 4x5 on the street in Greensboro, and people just came up to us and started talking, and I was making photographs of them. So in that case, it was really a great tool to kind of get conversations going with people. And then there's been other times, like in West Virginia, where I've been out with my 4x5 and someone came out and asked me if I was from the CIA. So I've had people, you know, come up and ask me all kinds of questions about it. And I've had people, you know, come up and, you know, think it's like a tool for evil in some ways. So there's like all different variety of reactions to it. But for me, it's always been a companion, basically, and just an incredibly easy tool to use, and a brilliant tool. I mean, it's really just so easy and simple to use, and it's all wood, beautifully made, and I just really love using it. So this is me in my happy place, basically, in a big pile of wood, making a photograph.
I like it. I approve. And I appreciate that you said that you find it quite easy to use, because I'm sure a lot of people would look at that and think there's all kinds of contraptions and magic happening under there.
I can see that, but it really is. You know, I've tried to use digital cameras, and I have nothing. You know, I'm not like pro film or anti-digital or anything like that. But I find digital cameras harder to use than this camera, and I love using it.
You mentioned something that flows really well into another question I had, and we've talked about this a little bit, but you've noted in your previous interviews about this project that it was really important to you to not focus on stereotypical images of the rural South, which was something that I was thinking about when I curated this project as well. So and you've spoken about this a little bit, but thinking about especially the first couple of weeks as you approached this month, how did you strike up conversations with residents? How did you pick out the places you were going to visit as you were still getting the lay of the land? How did you approach the beginning of this residency?
Yeah, so I mean, I did spend some time looking at photographs that had already been made, not just there, but in the South. And you know, one of the first conversations that I had when I arrived was I was talking to someone about how I was making these photographs, and they said, well, just, you know, just don't take any more pictures of poor kids barefoot on a porch. And I was like, okay, you know, it's kind of an odd thing to say. But what it said to me was that, and that was someone who lived there, that they had seen those photographs. And what I took from his comment was that he had negatively attributed his own view of his community and his culture through that imagery. And so you know, I thought to myself, like, I need to kind of approach this and do what my professors in architecture school told me to do over and over again, which is you have to lose any preconceived ideas about what you think this is or what you think you're going to do here. And I think it's even more critical to keep that in mind when you're going into a situation where great work has already been made, because it's if you don't lose those preconceptions, if you don't kind of put aside that history, it's very easy to just kind of fall back into that kind of a way of seeing. And I think the goal, you know, of many photographers and artists is to show something that hasn't been seen before, both for the viewer and for yourself. And so it was, you know, a personal challenge. You know, this kind of goes back to the original question that you had asked about other photographers being there and making photographs. It's just so important to lose those preconceptions and to really encourage your own way of singing to come to the forefront. And so, you know, when I heard that statement from him, it was right at the beginning, and it was almost like he was telling me, you know, don't do anything that you may have seen already. Keep your mind and your eyes open for what you might experience here that's new. And I sort of tried to do that, you know, with him in mind, with thinking that, you know, maybe it's not fair to kind of continually portray areas, and you could say the same thing about Maine, the lobster boats and the, you know, the wintry scenes, but maybe that's not really the most accurate documentation or portrait that you can make of a place. And so, you know, it was really just a challenge to myself to just really try and lose that imagery that photographers are so ingrained with, you know, that's so ingrained in us. You know, these photographs of Chris and Barry and Walker Evans, it's like, how do you lose that, you know? But I think when you go into a situation like this, you have to, otherwise you'll never come out of it. It will be simply a continuation of their voices.
I think we could keep talking for much longer.
I told you I could go on. I could go on and on.
It's
maybe
wonderful.
could we just talk about maybe that one photograph of the road? I think that you had said you weren't sure if the photograph of the woman in the green suit or the image of the red kind of road was. I'm not sure if that's the photograph you were talking about, but for me,
yes, the first one. Bridget, if you could pull that up, thanks. And then also, I just wanted to let everybody know that's listening or watching with us, we're coming towards the end of our time. So if you have a question for Lauren, now would be the time. Hit that Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen. You can type it in there. If that's not working, you can type it in the chat. And our 2 phone listeners, if you have a question, you can dial *9 on your phone.
I'll just talk like briefly, because I know I can go on forever, but I'll talk briefly just about this photograph and the one of the church with that red truck going by, and for totally different reasons. But I always kind of open, you know, photographers, when they come back with this big body of work, at some point have to grapple with how to sequence these photographs. And I'm sure, you know, curators have to grapple with that question too, because the narrative can change so drastically depending on the order of the pictures that you show. And for some reason, this photograph always starts first for me. And I think because it is so kind of fundamentally raw. It's a raw, like, kind of landscape photograph, but also because it so clearly shows for me like what I interpreted as these kind of primary colors in the place, this red, blue, and green, just kind of everywhere. And just this road that goes to nowhere, you know. And so you were talking about how did you find the places to photograph? It's like, it was just time and time and time again, just driving these roads and seeing where they take you. And so it kind of, you know, it references like so many different parts of the experience for me that I wanted to kind of just share that this has always been kind of the opener for me. And then the other photograph with the church and that red truck was just kind of a funny, weird moment, because it was about to storm, and I was planning on just photographing that church, and the hands kind of in the window, that kind of decal for me was just like, it's just another symbol of, like, prayer and spirituality. And I just liked kind of the architectural lines of this scene. But at the same time, I was just waiting there, thinking about how I wanted to make this photograph. And then I heard this truck coming down the road, and it was like, oh my gosh, where is it? How far away is it? When am I going to make the exposure? And it just, boom, it just clicked perfectly, where to me, I just sort of saw the church as like the back end of the truck. And the truck is kind of in motion, and that red, again, it was just there, like, all the time. And so it was just kind of a funny, like, photographic story that I'm sure the photographers who are watching this can relate to, these kind of serendipitous moments.
Sometimes it lines up just perfectly.
Sometimes, a lot of times it doesn't, but sometimes it does.
I really appreciated what you said about the dirt road photograph, and you don't know this because you haven't been able to see the show in person, but that is actually the first photograph in the entire
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It totally doesn't, I mean, it's just meant to be that. It's just like, it's like, here, we're going to set the stage for this narrative, for this experience. It's like, it's just all right there. That everything that you could talk about in that landscape, in that particular landscape, is in that photograph for me. The lushness of the green, the sky, the bright blue, the puffy clouds, and that red, that river of red, that the life of the flesh is in the blood, it's like, that is the vein. So that's so funny, but not surprising. It's just meant to be that way.
Yes, it lined up. There's it's a for folks who haven't seen it, it's a 3-artist show, 8 works by each artist for 24 works in total, and I just knew that had to be the one.
That's great. I love that.
So let's see. I'm looking at our Q&A. Holly Linton, she says, just wanted to say that I did see the show and it looks great. Thanks, Holly.
Hi, Holly.
We appreciate it.
I just wanted to say, there's so many artists right now who work years and years to get exhibitions ready to show, and the situation right now with this interruption is so difficult, and I'm just so grateful that we have this opportunity to bring some awareness to the show, and hopefully when this is over, people will be able to go and see it. And please, support your museums and support artists. We're all trying to get through this tough situation together.
Absolutely. And just so folks know, Lauren actually reached out to us at the museum. She saw our post on Instagram that we were developing digital content for a virtual museum while we're closed and so many of us are working from home. And she contacted us and was eager to do this chat with us. So we thank you, Lauren, as well,
My
for
pleasure.
having fun with us and experimenting with us. We have a question from Tom Wade. Hi, Tom. He says, viewing a photo puts me in a meditative mood or mode. When there is a title on the photo, it becomes a guided meditation. Do you usually sense where you want to take the viewer, or do you prefer to leave it open-ended?
Oh my God, what a brilliant question. This could get into tricky terrain, actually, but my feeling is that when I'm making photography, that I would prefer that more questions be raised than answered. And so the question about the titles, what we were talking about earlier, in part why I don't usually title my photographs is because I don't want to impose some kind of narrative on them, that I want to leave enough space for the viewer to participate in this exchange between the photograph and themselves. And sometimes it can be hard to do that, I think, if the photograph is drowning in language or ideas. And so in this particular case, I felt that the titles were still abstract enough that in reading them, that you just get a sense of the poetic nature of it and the kind of spiritual nature of it without having me tell you either what to look at or what to believe about the photograph or what to question about it, that could still be left up to you. There's a great video of Eggleston giving an interview, which I'm sure you can find on YouTube. But the interviewer is trying to kind of pull out information from him about his photographs and why do you make them. And the interviewer asks, I don't even know which photograph they're talking about. The interviewer asks, so, you know, is what you were trying to do with this photograph ... And he kind of looks up in the air and he's like, no, that's not really it. And then the interviewer says, well, was it this? And no, that's not really it either. And, you know, I think photography, because of its deceptive sense of truth-telling, can often give someone a false sense of knowledge about what they're looking at. And so I definitely prefer to kind of leave that relationship as open-ended as possible. So thank you for the great question.
That was great. Thanks, Tom. And then we also have a comment from Marianne Richter, who is our director. And this is to you, Lauren. She says, thank you so much for suggesting this terrific conversation. It has been illuminating.
Thank you. And thank you to Rebecca. It's great. It's great for me. And I'm happy to, you know, bring some attention to the show in the museum. Yeah.
So we just have a couple more minutes here. If anybody has a last question they want to pop in the chat, or excuse me, the Q&A. We talked about this a little bit, Lauren, but is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up, either about your time in Hale County overall, or your most recent exhibition that just closed in Cincinnati, or anything else that you'd like to share with us?
You know, just for those of you who've been kind of following what I've been doing, I did just have a big exhibition in Cincinnati, the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, and it was the first time I was showing sculpture, large scale kind of architectural interventions, which was a totally new endeavor for me. And I would just like to say for the students out there who might end up watching this at some point that, you know, that the most important thing that you can do as an artist is to push yourself into terrain that you're not familiar with. And the second that you are working when you're not afraid, then something is wrong and you need to push yourself further. And that's with any medium. I think that these experiences that have been the most beneficial for me have been ones where I have had to put myself in a completely new situation. And that's when I've learned the most. That's when I've pushed myself the most as an artist. And I would just encourage anyone out there who's either thinking about photography or working as an artist to remember that, and to use this time of fear in as positive a way as possible and get back in the studio.
I think that's good life advice for all of us, not just for artists or photographers, but to keep pushing ourselves and to use this as a time of reflection on what we'd like to do and how we might like to challenge ourselves next.
Yep.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you to everyone. Please go and see the show at the Columbus Museum. How long was the show supposed to run, Rebecca? Was it?
It's the current closing date is July 5th.
Okay.
We're currently closed until April 27th, 28th. That closure will most likely be extended. So we'll keep everyone updated on our website, which is columbusmuseum.com. You can also follow us on all of our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates on when we'll be reopening. I would say it's somewhat likely that this show may be extended a little bit, so keep your eyes out for that in particular. Lauren also gave a shout out to Bridget Russell, who is our Director of Marketing and Public Relations. She's done a great job being
Thank you, Bridget.
Our technical host today. Claps for Bridget. She's also done a great job creating some really wonderful digital content for our virtual museum. So if you go to columbusmuseum.com and look up at the top right, I believe, or within the menu function, if you're using a phone, you can see the link to the virtual museum. There's all kinds of different videos with myself, with our Curator of American Art. I believe at least one of our educators has some art making activities that will be up soon if they're not already up. And we're going to keep churning out content during this time when we can't serve you in our building. We're going to serve you online. So you can keep an eye out on our social media platforms for that, or visit the website. I think, yep, there it is. Right there, the virtual museum. So
be safe, everybody.
Yes, thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.